This happened when I was in my early 20s. I was working in a retail store in a mall, but there wasn't enough hours, so I asked if there was anything else I could do, and my boss told me that the location at the other mall needed more help, so I could go there on my weekend. I decided to take the bus route that was a bit longer, but that I didn't have to make any transfers. So I got up early and caught the earliest one I could. The bus ride was fairly normal. I got to see parts of my city I hadn't seen before. I did notice that the bus eventually went into a more dingy neighborhood. There was more trash everywhere, abandoned buildings, houses and cars, etc. I noticed it, but I felt like I was safely on the bus and my destination was in a nice neighborhood. At some point, an elderly lady got on the bus, and I noticed that no one was getting up to offer her a seat, so I gave her mine, and I went to go hold the pole next to the side door of the bus and continued on my way. While riding, I remember looking at a guy next to me and asking if he knew how much longer it would take to get to my stop, but before he answered, someone hit the buzzer to get off. The door next to me opened, and then I felt hands on my free arm grabbing me and pulling me. I on reflex immediately clenched up because I genuinely don't like any physical contact with strangers outside of a greeting handshake. And I really think that reflex saved my life, because it took my brain a few seconds to register that someone was trying to pull me off the bus. A tall man in a white tank top, blue jeans, and white tennis shoes had come out of the back of the bus, grabbed my arm, and attempted to drag me off the bus. He had pulled me down to the second step before I even understood what was going on, and I was just barely still hanging on to the pole. The arm he was grabbing had my purse on it, and I actually tried to shake my purse down to him, so he let go, but he had no interest in my purse. I had just about started calling for help when I felt someone grab my wrist and pull me back up towards the bus. The man trying to pull me down must have realized that he couldn't get me without this dragging out longer than he expected, so he finally gave up and ran off. And that was it. The guy ran off, the door shut, and I vaguely remember hearing the man who saved me say something along the lines of, "You would die in that neighborhood." And I had apparently gone into some kind of shock, because I only remember saying, "Oh." I don't even remember thanking him. I didn't say anything to the driver. I didn't contact the police like I should have. I don't even remember my shift at that other location. I don't remember the ride home. It was like I was numb. It was when I was at home, had completely showered and gotten ready for bed in my nightgown, that I sat at the edge of my bed and thought, did I almost get kidnapped? I almost got kidnapped. I have a lot of regrets about all of this. I regret not contacting the police in case that guy goes after another woman. At least women would be aware that he was out there. And I regret not thanking and keeping in contact with the nice person who saved me. I actually posted an article in my local CL in hopes of him somehow hearing it and knowing how grateful I am to him. Well, anyways, to the guy that tried to take me off of the bus, let's not meet, and I hope you get caught. In my 8th grade year, I moved in with a family member after my mother passed away, and this family member lived pretty far into the country. Because of this, I had to ride the school bus to my new school. I used to live in town before the move, so this was my first time on a bus, besides school field trips. But then there were other adults present. In the morning, there were only about 6 or 7 students on the bus, and I was the first person to be picked up, and the last one to be dropped off after school. For the first few weeks of school, everything seemed fine. The students were quiet, everyone kept to themselves, headphones in and whatnot. Being the first to get on, I always headed straight to the back of the bus to avoid everyone. Not that I had issues with anyone, I was just socially awkward, and the more people I could avoid talking to, the better. As for my bus driver, we can call him Tom. He seemed like a normal bus driver. He didn't say a word to anyone and just did his job. He began getting a little friendlier to me when he dropped me off, since I was the last one to get off. But it was never anything strange. It was a smile and a "see you in the morning" or "have a nice night." Nothing I would ever suspect. Things continued like this for a while, nothing exciting happening, until me, being a 15-year-old girl who had just lost her mother, decided to go through a giant tantrum and begged that I no longer wanted to live with this family member. I missed the more populated city, my old friends, and my old school. So about 2 months into going to this school, I decided to move back home with another family member. This is where the story shifts. On the last week of my bus rides, I told Tom I would no longer be taking his bus anymore, as I was homesick and moving back home. He asked me to sit up towards the front of the bus for the rest of that week so we could say goodbye better. I didn't think anything of it. He was a 40 to 50-year-old man who never gave me any red flags. Anyways, I listened and moved to the seat right behind him so he could look at me through the large mirror above him and we could chat. It all seemed innocent at first. He asked about my mother, why I was leaving, what I wanted to do when I grew up, blah blah blah. The last few days of riding the bus, the questions got stranger, and I may have not been able to see the signs of a creep, but I knew the questions weren't things a middle-aged man should be asking a teenage girl. If anything, I thought he was being nosy. He asked if I had a boyfriend, if I had my first kiss yet, and what an ideal date for me would be. I answered honestly, but with a weird feeling in my stomach. Gut feelings are 500% real. On my final day riding the bus, as I got on, Tom asked me if I would sit in the front again, but wait until everyone else was off of the bus. I agreed, going back to my past seat in the back of the bus, and waited until everyone got off. I moved to the seat behind him again, but this time he didn't say anything to me at first. I probably should have mentioned earlier, but from the last stop before me and my stop, there was about a 25 to 30 minute driving distance. I would say he didn't say a word to me for about 20 minutes of that time. I sat listening to my music until he pulled the bus over. We were on my road, and I knew my family member's house was close ahead, yet he pulled over and stopped the bus. If I could explain to you the fear that ignited in me when the bus came to a halt and Tom turned in his chair so he was facing me with a smile on his face, I would. I had seen one too many movies with creepy men doing things they shouldn't be doing to teenage girls, and I expected the worst. I was expecting to be assaulted, harmed, kidnapped, or maybe even killed. But it never came to that. Instead, Tom told me to take my phone out and add his number to it. He said he would be there if I needed to talk about my mother, telling me the story of his own mother, and things I can't really remember. I just remember it being an innocent conversation, no matter how weird you might think it is for a bus driver to offer a teenage girl his number. He dropped me off after that, and we said our goodbyes. Years passed, and I was in 10th grade when I saw Tom again. I still had his number in my contacts, but I never contacted him, even when things got rough, because truly, what girl would call a strange bus driver when she needed help? Not me. I was at Walmart with a few friends, and we decided to split up to get the things we individually needed. I headed off to get a box of Q-tips when I heard someone say my name. I could tell it was a male's voice, and I figured it would just be a male teacher I had once had. It was Tom, but I couldn't tell at first. He had grown out his facial hair, and I had honestly just forgotten about him. But once he said hello to me, I remembered everything. I wasn't necessarily scared. I just found it odd that this man, who was my bus driver for a few months, remembered me. After over 2 years, it was a simple conversation. He asked how I had been and how high school was going for me, and I answered, not really bothering to ask how he was. We said our goodbyes, and I met back up with my friends, explaining to them the whole story of Tom, to which they found it scary that I never told anyone my bus driver gave me his number and asked me strange questions. I explained I thought he was just being friendly, because I truly did. I haven't seen Tom in person since then. Years have gone by. I'm in college, and I thought the story was over then. Just some overly friendly bus driver. It could have stayed innocent, right? About a month ago, I was talking to someone I went to school with at the other school, and I mentioned to her how scared I was about the bus out there because of Tom. She was shocked I had mentioned him and asked for the full story. I told her a summary of it. The questions, the stopping the bus to give me his number, the encounter at Walmart. I told her he just gave me the creeps, and I hoped I would never see him again. This was when I found out Tom had been arrested for sexually assaulting 2 minors. She not only showed me his mugshot, but told me what had happened. My story nearly lined up perfectly with these 2 other children. Bus driver who asked personal questions, offers his phone number to comfort children with trauma and act on it. The only difference was, I got out of there. If I hadn't moved back to my hometown, I still wonder what could have happened to me. I'm extremely lucky that I never contacted his number, and feel sorry for the 2 kids that did contact him, feeling they could trust this man. I know you're in jail, Tom, and are not getting out for a while, but please, let's not meet again. My bus route was long, anywhere between 1 to 2 hours, and I was one of the last stops. It was on a really rural route with lots of mountains, dirt roads, and holloways. Being a rural area, most of these hollows were long, windy roads that families lived on, and normally just 1 to 2 families of kids to be dropped off at the same point. This meant that if a particular family of kids didn't ride the bus that day, for whatever reason, that the bus driver could skip that hollow and save us anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes off of the total route. How could this ever be a bad thing, right? Well, one particular hollow, about 5 miles long, had only 2 stops, 2 different families, but the second family lived at the furthest point. It was easily 3 to 4 miles past the first family's drop-off point, down a crooked, dead-end, single-lane dirt road. It was the worst part of the route each time. Now, on days the second family did not ride the bus, if the driver skipped driving all the way to the second family's house, then it would save a 20-minute round trip, not to mention the stress of driving on the claustrophobic dirt road in a huge, hulking school bus. There were also times the family waited to pick up the kids in their own car, At the first drop-off, to save the bus time and spare it the experience of driving that road. So, of course, whenever they could, the bus would turn around at the first family's drop-off point. However, this was not as smooth of a turn as going the full way to the second family's house. This drop-off point was a small circular area with a couple of different driveways sprawling off, only one of which was large enough for a school bus to fit, and definitely not big enough for a bus to do a 360 turn in one swoop. But with the help of one larger driveway, a 3-point turn could get us out of there easy peasy. At most, the bus needed 2 meters of this driveway space and hardly 30 seconds of its time. We did this happily for as long as I could remember, until either new residents moved in or the existing residents of the trailer in this driveway, about 20 meters away, lost their minds. Suddenly, there was a large red farm gate at the extreme end of the driveway. No possible way for the bus to turn around when close. For the first few months, whenever we could cut the route short by turning there, the driver would stop the bus during the 3-point turn, open the gate, barely reverse into the driveway, pull out, stop the bus again, close the gate back exactly as it was, and get back on the bus and carry on, saving us 20 minutes of needless driving. Keep in mind, this only happened when the second family either did not ride the bus or was being picked up at this point, aka not very often. Then, one day, we turned up, and there was now a lock on the gate. Huh? So we drove the 20 minutes and carried on. Still, each time we had the chance to turn, the bus driver would check if it was unlocked. I do not know if it was ever requested to leave it unlocked, but I know from the driver's reactions, they wanted it to be. So, if it did happen to be unlocked, we would take the shortcut and the driver would put the gate back as it was. To my knowledge, no one ever complained about this. Then comes the day of the trap. We get to the first drop-off. The second family was not riding the bus. Nothing looks amiss except, hey, what do you know, the gate is open. I can remember the smile on the driver's face as she put the bus in reverse and began to turn. At this point in the ride, it was just myself and 3 or 4 other kids, only one being a grade above me, and I was barely 6 years old. Of course, I was chattering away with my friend. I did not notice at first that we had stopped. Once I did start to look around, however, to my confusion, there was an assortment of ATVs, 4-wheelers, side-by-side, etc., and actual cars that had pulled out of side driveways to surround the bus in every single direction. To make it even more confusing, and thinking back, horrific, they all had an assortment of firearms. Yes, guns. Now, I'm 6 and grew up around guns. I wasn't scared by what I saw, but I also didn't realize that I was being held hostage at gunpoint. All I remember is the feeling of profound confusion, of not being able to work out A, why are we sitting here? B, what are these people doing? And C, why are the other kids crying? Maybe I was blissfully ignorant, but the driver told us to play on the floor and not look out the windows. So, me being me, I propped my jacket up over the window in my seat and told everyone we could play under my row, and I ended up having a great, albeit boring, time waiting. It went on for what felt like hours, and I never looked out the window during it, but I'm sure it was really only an hour at most, give or take. because our parents slowly started showing up looking for us. I remember 2 kids being allowed off before me. Then, as I was growing truly bored, my grandfather showed up to save me. He came on the bus, spoke to the driver, and held my hand as we walked back to his truck. No one else saying a word except my cheery goodbye to the bus driver. I remember all of the gang just staring her down as I walked away, and she never moved from her seat the entire ordeal. I don't know what happened after I left. It was only later that I grew up to realize the severity of the event. I know for sure my grandfather and parents called the school system, but I never heard of any punishment or follow-up. The gate was never left open again, and we still had to drive that route each day, always driving it all the way through, except for those blissful days both families of kids did not ride, and we could skip it altogether. The same bus driver stayed on the route. She was honestly an angel to remain so calm and collected throughout.